welcome everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, y'all. This is Charlie Hedges welcoming you to the next chapter with Charlie. And our topic for today is yet another surprise, not only for you, but for me. My guest today on the show has been one of our most popular guests. Courtney Marchesani is a marvelous conversationalist. She is a health and wellness coach who is not only brilliant and provocative and working on her PhD, she also offers practical wisdom and impacts that fit all our lives. Now, because of our conflicting calendars, Courtney and I have tried for a week and a half to touch base, and we've not been able to. And so this will give us an opportunity to chat about unexpected potential topics, which may likely include ideas around hypnosis, mystical experiences and visions of angels. And then we may even get into a topic that she went to a symposium and heard lectures on death, psychedelics, and mystical experiences. And for those of you who know me, I'm probably into that. So what I suggest is that we let the energy of our relationship make this call, and the subjects that we're going to talk about it, make it just happen like fun. So with that, let's bring on my friend Courtney Marchesani. Courtney, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you. What a great lead-in. I'm so excited to get to these topics. They're really thought-provoking, and especially the mystical and transformative experiences. I can't wait to see where we're going to go in our conversation.
So let's, if that's an especially with you, let's go down that track. And first just tell me, what do you mean by, what did I say, mystical experiences and the visions and visions with angels and these sorts of things? Tell me, what is the genesis of this? I'm very curious.
Well, I've been interested in it for a very long time. I'd say about 20 years.
Oh, really?
Because of stories that I have heard, my own personal experiences that kind of touch on liminal and liminality and being in that type of consciousness that brings in the mystical. There's not a great word for it, but it definitely has a pattern in which it shows up in someone's awareness. It typically means, it doesn't have to be angelic, but it typically means that you feel that you've either seen, heard, or even through a deep empathic awareness, which is through the felt sense, through the body and feelings in the body, where you feel like you're in contact with something else. And so that something else really depends on how it shows up to the person.
Yeah, and I think liminal is the right word. It's a difficult word. It's not a common word in our vocabulary, but once you study the word really does explain that unknown space in between conscious reality and subconscious reality. And do you know what I was discovering as I was looking at liminal space? Do you know where that noun comes from liminal? Now, that's used adjectively, but there is a liminal aspect to a door. A door, in the hinged part of the door, there are two aspects. The bottom aspect is the liminal, and the top aspect is the lintel. And that everything, that things are based on the liminal, because that's the rotating, that's from which it rotates. It gets guided by the top, but it is rotating from the space. And I find, when I've had my liminal experiences, I have found them, Courtney, and tell me what you think about this, in the lucid dream area, where I think I'm wide awake and I'm really not.
A lot of people report, like in certain types of contact experiences, like 86%, some studies show people have these experiences through lucid dream states. And that can be before, as you're going into sleep, or it can be as you're waking up. And they can also be hypnagogic or hypnagogia. And that is when you actually see an image in front of your eyes as you're going to sleep, and that image appears alive and bright, and it's materializing in a way that feels, it's obviously not there, right? It's not in material reality as if you would look over from your bed and like see your desk or a chair, but you can see it in a half reality, which is why I like the word liminality, because some individuals really have that capacity to go through a transliminal space. And what they have found in transliminality studies, especially using assessments, is that individuals who are more prone to transliminal experiences, they have a high level of creativity. They have deep empathic awareness, right? And so there's all these different types of factors that can go into transliminal awareness. And you could have 1, 2, 3, maybe even more of these qualities in your personality that kind of make you more prone to having those experiences. So I like that you brought up the sleep, because in some studies it's shown, like I said, up to 86% of people experience transliminal experiences before they go to sleep or when they're waking up.
I had a difficult transitional experience with an organization that I'm not with anymore, and it was a very difficult time for me, and just a number of factors involved. I woke up one night, I was in an abbey. I was meeting with my spiritual director. The abbot of the abbey is my spiritual director, and I was meeting with him the following day. And that night, I got this clear. I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning. Courtney, I was lucid, perfectly clear. I got a music, a song from YouTube, posted that, wrote to a couple of friends at 4 o'clock in the morning, said I awoke early. And it was so clear. I mean, I knew exactly what I was doing. I don't know ever recalling such immense clarity. And then in the morning when I read it, I had no idea what the hell I was talking about.
Really?
But at the time, it was perfectly clear.
A couple of things are springing to mind when you're saying that. Okay, so I just wanted to ask you about music. And have you ever woken up in the middle of the night before and you've heard music? Either music you've never heard before, but it was so clear and you could hear all the notes? That's one question.
No, I don't think I don't recall having that.
Okay, because I was thinking maybe you have that sensory awareness where you're, sound sensitivity, or even have like hidden composing, right, abilities, because composers will have that experience. I've had it where I've woken up in the middle of the night. It's 100% clear. It's almost like it's coming from this deep, resonant, soulful place where I hear music. And I've even at times written it down, written down the notes and hummed it out and recorded it because it was so clear, so lucid, coming from that deep space. Okay, and then I was going to ask you about hearing music and the musicality and if you're musically inclined. But the other thing was there, when you woke up from it, was there any other images that led you to feel like it was like precognitive, or was it more like just feeling deeply in the space and more resonance than you usually feel?
Boy, what a good question. I have to, I can say that both felt it, but it was probably more the latter. It wasn't as precognitive, but with just, I was so struggling with solution and what to do next. And it was absolutely clear that this was taken care of. It was handled by the universe. And it was a particular song that was sung in a TV series that I saw. And it was Psalm 77, and and it's basically, God, where the hell are you? And and the psalm was and the psalm was so it was so poignant.
That, just maybe important to just sit with. It's oftentimes when we're feeling that need, right? And we're questioning, or we're confronting something, or we have a conflict, or we're trying to solve a problem. We're working on something, and we're not really sure which way to go. Sometimes, intuitively, you're going to get an answer through an intuitive means, which is not words. It's through these other types of sensory experience, like music, like feelings. The depth and the process of synchronicity will come through and be right in front of your face, and you'll think, my goodness, how could I have heard that song right at this time?
Yeah.
Right at this very special time, a critical time. And so Jung used to call those time periods like critical times or critical experiences, where you're really working on something deeply, and of all your environment around you will kind of help you in a way and show you in your awareness what is needed. And so that could have been your medicine, right? What you needed, that was your remedy to feel that deep music and that connection with the psalm. And that's kind of how I would interpret that. But you can interpret it a lot of different ways, right?
You could interpret that?
I mean, I would look at it as getting an answer to your question, or even like a remedy to that serious issue that you were facing. Yeah.
I have this.
I think that's your soul, in a sense, helping you.
It is, and I'm sure we've spoken of it as my devotion to the divine and the holy. I've become reluctant to use the word God because God is so boxed up, and everybody, when people hear the word God, this entity is placed in a limiting space, and it is not limiting. It is everything. And so that's why I like to use the word the holy and the divine. But I feel like it was an insight from the divine. I feel like it was outside of me that came. It was not from me. It was outside of me, yet it was crystal clear. It gave me the confidence to move forward with this thing that was a very troubling and difficult time for me. It was a marvelous space. And you know what I think too? I think a lot of this is postmodern, is that with the invention of the printing press, and then we had the age of reason, and then we had the age of enlightenment, and everything became so left brain, so Newtonian left brain proofs. You have to, scientific proofs or syllogisms that just don't work in that right brain, intuitive, catching from the source of the universe these messages that are being sent out. And Roseanne Cash once talked about she doesn't write songs, she catches them as they pass by. I think that's more of a direction of where we need to head, and we've been so limited by our post-enlightenment thinking. Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, absolutely. I really want to bring up one of my favorite authors who wrote about this, exactly what you're articulating. It's called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, the conflict between word and image. And the author is Leonard Schlein, and he's done a number of books, but he's, broken out exactly what we were talking about, language, the formation of language and words versus this other type of language that I call the lost language, right? Because it's been buried, it's in the ruins of what has become technology in the technological age. If we have a question, we just go and we find it online and it's there. And the beauty of that is that it's easy, it's accessible, but in comparison and in contrast, each human, right, which is so deeply connected to nature and the natural world, which is our birthright as humans, to coexist within the environment and the nature, and that includes spiritual and divine and revelatory experiences. That goes beyond words.
Right.
It's within us. It's in our heart. It's connected to every living thing, and we're part of that every living thing. And so I think that the word God, although I really hate to say this because I love God and the divine, but I really feel like it is a loaded term. And the only reason why is because of the history of, these ideological things that people don't want to ascribe to anymore. But I feel like one time it was definitely like an old 70s church. And somebody invited me to come to their like weekend, offerings. And so I went, and they had a service and everything. It was more definitely like a new age, church. It was called the Center for Divine Man. But one of the women there, who was one of the pastors, we sat and talked, and she said, well, who's the God of your heart? And I love the way she framed it, because it leaves it open. It lets you go into that divine space without the loaded term, without the part of that that's, for lack of a better word, the framework or the patriarchal framework we've been dealing with for so long.
Right.
So the God of your heart lets you connect deeply to all that we just mentioned, the natural world, the divine, the creation, the creator. So I'm with you on that, and I think there are some really good authors who have explored that language that you're talking about, that's feeling, images, transcendence.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. I want to, since we're on the mystical, I want to move on to that, but I want to bring up an idea about the mystical, and that is one author that I follow a lot talked about, because I've studied since 2020, I've done in-depth study of the late medieval Christian mystics. So it'd be 1200 to as late as 1600, but that would be it. And they were not into logical assumptions, logical proofs. It was more like the text, the biblical text, is not trying to prove anything. It's more of it's more in symbolism. It's the meaning. It's the words between the line. I mean, it's the thoughts between the lines of words, and we've lost again. I keep referring to the age of enlightenment and the age of reason. We've lost symbolism. Symbolism is no longer important. It is more like, can I prove it? Is this factual? Is this actual? It almost doesn't make a difference. It's what has it done to your intuition, to your soul, to your well-being. And with that, I want to move on to you. You are at this point in your life, it seems like you had talked about that mystical is important to you, and I want to know why. What's going on with the mystical aspect of Courtney Marchesani?
Well, I think the reason why is because of exactly what you just said, the symbols and the metaphors. And so I'm a big dreamer, and a lot of my nighttime in my youth, I would get these deep, vivid, very almost like surrealistic, but it was also just very vivid. I don't know how else to describe it except the granularity and the messages from my dreams that came through were just like epics. They're like epic dreams, and they would have messages and symbolism and metaphors, and I really tried to understand what that meant, because for one, when you're dreaming like that every night, it feels meaningful, right? And then the other thing is, there are some dreams that you never forget. You wake up from them and they make such a mark on you that you know that there's meaning. And it is truly what Jung talks about with the archetypal stuff.
Right.
There are those life-shattering, earth-shattering, psyche-shattering dreams. And I'd experienced those on occasion. And so the mythical part of that spoke to me, it was all through symbolic language. Because it was all symbolic, and we don't learn that, right? We don't learn that in school or even college. If you're lucky, you might get a class or two if you're tuned into that, but I never did. And so I had to learn. I had to learn about all of it. And so I would pick up dream books and I would explore the symbols, and then some things, I looked at and they were obviously more generic or general. They didn't have the specific meaning. And so the reason why I'm into mystical experiences, because so often our dreams are the language and the route into the mystical, because of, myths and how important they are through our history and our communities and our culture.
Tell me just briefly, because I know you could spend the rest of the podcast on it, but tell me, how does the mystical, does your thinking in symbolism and not so much in proven fact and your dreams and sort of what we would call otherworldly experiences? You're a very practical person. You can think way out there in the world, but you are very down to earth in what you talk about. How is that impacting your life now? What sort of drew you into it, and how is that impacting what you're doing right now?
I don't think I wouldn't give them as much credence as I do nowadays, having the experience and the wisdom that's come through them. But I'll give you just a brief example. Is when an epic dream comes through, and there is literally a term called epic dreams. but they're not restful. It's when you go to sleep at night and you really feel like you're undergoing a journey. It's almost like the entrance of that door that you're talking about, where you enter into another world, and there's exciting things happening, there's conflict, there's these people that you don't really want to see, in your life, your nightlife that you're confronting, and you're working out problems. And so the reason why I found that they have been important is because they not only help me solve problems on a literal, practical level. As you said, I am a very practical person. I'm a Virgo. So I'm all about practicality. But the important thing is that I have problem solving that comes through it. And whether that means problem solving on a literal, like, material world level, or if it's problem solving on a spiritual level, I find that my dreams will help me get the answer. And they come when I ask, and there's a prayer involved. And so it's about giving yourself the time and the space to allow that answer to come through. And so I rely a lot less on the outer world and much more on my inner world. And the reason why is because my dreams have helped me protect me. It's given me precognitions, which I know that sounds crazy, but it's literally, when you start to dream and you start to pay attention to it, you see the difference between concrete, and you start to see the difference between metaphorical dreams. Concrete dreams are the ones that give you the practical answer and the solution that you're looking for, that you can't get in your daytime. The metaphorical ones are more about the symbols that we're talking about, the myths that come through, the characters that come through. For example, if you have a dream where you feel like someone's breaking in to your house, and a lot of people describe this, or they're hiding from the person and they're trying to get away and they can't, that is typically a symbol of something new coming into your life. And so you shouldn't be fearful of it, but the metaphor is there and it's consistent because it's part of the collective unconscious. So the reason I pay attention to those things is because it gives me a higher level of awareness to tune into of things that are coming that I need to be prepared for. That's the practical answer.
What about someone like me who has dreams? Oddly enough, I've had some visitations in dreams that have been very profound, especially by the Divine Feminine. The Divine Feminine has had a huge impact on me. But I'm a person of contemplative and mystical prayer. I can have an hour or two of silence, of just going to another place. And I feel like, is it possible that I can feel like I have these experiences I'm not asleep, I'm conscious, but I'm not totally conscious. There are avenues that are coming to me that are just, I'm surprised by the thought. Is it necessary to be asleep, or can you be awake in a state of contemplation and meditation?
It depends, okay? It depends on the level of activity and where your attention is from the day to day. I find that when we are distracted or consumed by something like a project or a relationship or any of those things that really take all of our time away from our mindfulness, they usually typically come, those answers or those experiences will come through the dreams, because while your brain is resting and it's in its down state, your mind, right, it is still working stuff out for you. So a lot of times, initially, they'll come through the dream state because they need to erupt and come through while your body and your mind are healing. And when you're relaxed and you're in that deep sleep, it allows you to confront them or to heal or to bring issues up that you need to be aware of in your conscious mind that you're not, that they're subconscious issues. So, but with that being said, right, that's probably why most people have these experiences through the dream states. But they do cross over into the daily life. And studies have shown meditators, people who have a consistent meditation practice or prayer, right, they have more of these types of experiences during the waking hours. And the other caveat, the really important group that oftentimes gets overlooked, are individuals who have had near-death experiences. When an individual has gone through clinical death, and this is part of my work through the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies when I wrote the essay, about life after death and consciousness living after the physical body dies, a clinical death. It's this transformative experience where they go through very much like what you've seen in the literature, a tunnel or some type of opening or portal they pass through. Typically, they'll meet a guardian or a deceased loved one, or maybe even a relative that they never knew who's guiding them through that process. When they come back, they talk about how different reality is. And they'll also talk about the contract that they made to come back after they've died into their body because of whatever reason there is. Sometimes it's because they're an integral part of their family. Sometimes it's because they still have work to do and a mission or a purpose that wasn't fulfilled. And so those individuals who have gone through that experience, which is oftentimes traumatic, right, because it's clinical death, but it's also often transformative, they come back and they have more of these types of lucid experiences or experiences that happen when they're not asleep because their consciousness has somehow been expanded through that journey. And they come back and they're more prone to having those visionary experiences that you're mentioning.
Let's give some insights to our listeners that are very intrigued with what you have to say, because it is, the unconscious mind that is formulating this and making an attempt to inform us, but it doesn't inform us in the conscious state. It informs us in a different way. How do people that are intrigued by this but don't have the dreams and don't have this, are they just blocked off from this type of information, or is there something they can do? Is there a practice that they can engage in that helps them to access this part of liminal thinking?
Well, I've always wondered that. I have always wondered that same question, maybe a little different flavor of that question. Like, so folks that are already kind of tuned into their intuition, can they expand it, right? Can they grow it and use it much more often for decision making versus just in like life-threatening situations, right? Because that's oftentimes where we really experience intuition for the very first time, and we notice it because it's life-saving. But yes, studies have shown, okay, there's different ways the brain processes information, right? So there's the parietal lobe, there's the temporal lobe, and you can go and look at different studies that show what happens when people are praying and how the brain lights up. But beyond that, and that's a whole field all on its own, about religious and spiritual experiences and what happens physiologically. But beyond that, there have been a lot of studies that show neuroplasticity.
We just did a show on that a couple weeks ago.
Part of that. And so it's the interconnectivity between the right and left, right hemispheres, and how that works for you individually. But with neuroplasticity and the way our brain is constantly pruning itself for, better maximum, like optimal functioning, you can do meditative practices. You can do mindfulness and awareness, and it will definitely increase those experiences more often. And they don't know why. My theory is that it's probably because of the interconnectivity between the right and the left hemispheres, right? But it's also you're putting your attention and your focus mindfully in a way that you're actually paying attention to what's going on in front of you. And that way, your consciousness is going to pick up on a lot more, your awareness. Rather than if you're just kind of going through your day, right, mindlessly or rushing about, you're going to miss a lot of those little cues and signals that are saying, hey, this is important, pay attention. That's why I was mentioning the dreams, because a lot of times we're just not paying attention to stuff, and the dreams will point that out to us. That's like the first touchstone for intuition.
Very cool. You know what I want to do? I want to take a break.
Okay.
And then I want to come back, and I'm looking at the topics that you and I had emailed about a couple of weeks ago. And you talked about visions of angels. Is that something that's important to you?
Yes, well, I have an upcoming talk at the IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and I'm presenting on angelic visitation.
Ooh,
I'm pretty in it right now because that's at the end of August. So yeah. I'm
okay, so that's going to be what we're going to talk about after the break. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Hi there, you're listening to Charlie Hedges in the Next Chapter with Charlie and my extra special guest, Courtney Marchesani, who I'd love to tell you what Courtney's all about, but it's too complicated. She is so bright, and she's talking about learning from a whole different space than what you learn in a school, but what you learn in life through intuitive experiences. And Courtney is going to be doing a lecture on visions and angels, and I have asked her to tell us all about that because I have no idea what that means. Well, I have some idea, but I'm really curious what Courtney has to say about it. So, Courtney, it's your show.
You're really cracking me up.
Why?
I love the way you said that. You know, like learning in a whole different way through an intuitive space, which is really. So I couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh,
so,
good.
Yeah.
At least something that there's a sentence to rely on.
I'm going to have to write that down. Yes. So angels. Why angels? When I had an experience, I had moved to Anchorage, Alaska. I started going to Sunday services at a local church. It was called the Center for Spiritual Living, and I loved their meditation hour, or actually half hour, before the pastor would come out and do her talk. And one morning, and I'm sitting there for the meditation, just sitting, there was just a small group of people, probably a handful of people in there with me. We're all in different locations, and I have my head down, and I'm meditating, but also kind of praying for clarity and for very specific reasons, and I felt a presence. And so I opened my eyes, and I saw a man standing up where the pastor usually is, in front of the whole space. And I didn't know what to make. I felt paralyzed because I recognized this person as Jesus, okay? And he had the white robe on, and he was hovering in the air, and he materialized in a way that it was obvious it was real. I was seeing him. I looked around the room. Nobody else was seeing him. They all had their heads down. And he kind of walked over to me. He touched my forehead, and then he turned around, and he said a few things that were very like what you'd expect from the Bible or, you know, a parable. It was very godlike. And then he turned around, he said another little message, and then he evaporated, just like he showed up. And
Were the words
so
special?
Confused by that experience, but also lifted by it. I didn't tell anybody about it for several months because it was such a deeply profound experience. And then I did start to talk about it to a few people who were, you know, Christian folks. And, you know, and their responses were quite unique and quite different. But the reason why I'm studying why some people see angels is because other people have had that same experience that I had, you know, that day at the Center for Spiritual Living, but they've seen angels. And they see them, they talk about them, they see them clearly, they get messages as well. And so I've been fascinated ever since I saw Jesus in the church that day about other people who might have the same type of perception. And they exist. And so I named the topic of my course for the IANS, I Know What I Saw. I know what I saw. And then how does secular society nowadays in contemporary modern society?
But you know what's interesting is that when you're using the word church, Christian, God, you are not using any of those terms in the traditional way.
Well, with my perspective, right? Because it's not through the typical way like a minister would see it. But I have compared my personal experience with what a lot of religious theologians talk about.
Well, it's what the mystics talk about.
It lines up.
It's what my mystics talk about, and it's faith in Christ and relationship with Christ without religion, without the rules of religion, without giving us prescriptive, we must believe this, we must believe that, rather than allowing, and that's why, I'm reluctant to use the word God even though I do believe in God. I like the divine and holy because it's without box. There's not a box around the divine and the holy. There's the edges are much softer and much wider. And I just want people to...
And I love that you leave it open. I would say my experience was 100% a mystical experience because I experienced a divinity what looked like almost like a holographic image that came into reality. And I think physics someday will be able to explain this type of perception. They don't have it now, but that's what led to me trying to understand individuals like myself who have this type of experience and visionary experiences that we can see, but other people don't. I don't know why that is, but there is a lot of validation for it because the messages that come through to the individuals through the divinity or through the deity or however you want to talk about that holy encounter are typically very, very spot on. They're very spot on. Like what he said to me that day was 100% what I needed in my soul. And not only that, he was projecting forward some type of information for the future, like this is a direction that you need to go in and you need to know. So if it is an actual mystical or spiritual or divine experience, it gives a direction. That's one of the things I've learned through my studies. There is a direction, and that's how you know it's a holistic spiritual divine experience.
And you know what occurs to me,
guidance.
Another benefit that occurs to me, and tell me if this works with you, is a direction and it's peace. There is a sense of peace that, I've had an authoritative statement that I can just rest on, that I can place my, my beliefs in this, and I can rest and let this be what it's going to be. I had an experience at a meeting. It was a business meeting in a Christian company, and they weren't acting real Christian at the time, whatever in the hell that means. I don't even know what that means.
I think everybody knows what that means.
But I was very troubled with what I thought the composition of the meeting and the results of the meeting were going to be about. I really thought it would be difficult. And I did not get quite clarity of the vision that you got, but I got this sense. There was an empty chair next to me. I had this profound sense of the Christ sitting next to me. Now, I could not see anything. There was no visual involved, but the essence, the presence was very strong, and I had been praying, for peace and understanding. And he was sitting on my left, and he put his right hand on my left hand, and he says, "I got this, Charlie. Don't worry." And those are the only words. I got this. And I just let it be. And the meeting was miraculous. It was just this sign of Jesus telling me, "I got this stuff, man. Don't worry about it. You just chill, just kind of follow along and watch what happens."
Well, there's two things that are really interesting about what you just said, okay? Because when you start getting into the spiritual perception, there's the left side and the right side, okay? When Jesus touches you on your left side and an angel touches you on your left side versus your right, and Jung talked about it too. And for the Bix essay that I did, I spoke with an astrophysicist who was very into Jungian thought. And he and I had this fascinating conversation about the left and the right, and when these spectrals or when these images show up on the left or the right side of the body. And so he talked about modern day physics and how, through his experience, very similar to yours, he had a physicist show up when he was working on something. And it was Pauly. Okay, and Pauly was very connected to Jung for a period of time. Now, they had a falling out, but what they were trying to do, which was so, talk about miraculous, was talking about the symbolic, right? Talking about these types of experiences coming through the subconscious into the conscious mind through an intuitive route that could somehow be connected to modern physics in their time to explain it. Now, they went through a parting of the ways, but one of the things that the astrophysicist was telling me was that it shows up sometimes on the left side for some people.
Oh,
and that's
really?
What happened to you, which I think is so interesting. The second part of it, from what you said, that I think is also incredible, was the message of, "I got this." Like, you don't need to worry. I can take this burden off of you. Because a lot of times we are so burdened with these real conflicts in the world. And when a divine image shows up and says, "I'm taking this from you," what a relief. What a relief on the soul, on the heart, to have that burden removed. And so if you could access that level, right, and have your guardian show up and help you out, I'm all for it. Take the burden, right?
And it doesn't happen all the time.
Show the path. Whatever the prayer is, when you have a prayer answered like that, it's like path is clear and you can see the way, and it's so much easier than suffering through things.
That's beautiful.
So I'm all for that.
That's incredible. Courtney, I want to go on to a whole different subject, but I just don't think we have time to go on to it. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah.
Courtney, we're going to have to do... Where do you live? You're on the East Coast, right?
Yeah.
I'm
in Alaska right now, but I will be on the East Coast in a couple weeks on the family farm, and I'll be there until I do the conference in Washington for IA.
What part? Oh, you're going to be in Washington State?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it'll be in Maryland. I'll be there for the
So that's where you're... I was just in Delaware at Bethany Beach.
Ooh, I've been there. What a beautiful place.
Yeah, it was nice. It was quite nice. We are, it's going to go on my calendar that we are going to have to meet and spend a day together.
Sure.
It's just, my conversations with you are unlike conversations with anyone else. I just feel like I'm tracking, I'm learning, I'm resonating. No wonder I called you and said, are you interested in doing another podcast? Because you're so good, Courtney. You're just the best.
There's a lot of updates. So I'm updating you, with more research, more work that's unfolding. I really have actually claimed, that, some people are having this type of visionary experience, and I'm passionate about that conversation, especially with you, because you're so synergistic. And you can go back and, forth and provide, different insights. And so it really is an unfolding of what comes forward in our conversations. And I really love that.
You know who my audience is right now? I've just determined, we're changing subjects. And I've just determined through a course, an 11-week course on first and second half of life. And the second half of life is much more symbolistic, much more... it happens after 55. It didn't happen to me until about 70 years old, where I finally realized I'll be 74 in a couple of months, that I am an elder in our society, and yet elders are not respected in American society. Asian cultures, Native American cultures, so many other cultures are so respectful of eldership. And I have noticed after this reunion, there were so many late millennials and early Gen Xers. Those were my audience, and I as I was talking, they caught what I was trying to say. They're wrestling with it. They think they're wrestling with God, but they're really wrestling, in my mind, they're wrestling with a sort of prescriptive religion, that you have to follow these rules, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. There is no relationship. There is no glory. There is no honor. There's no beauty in it. And I am in the process right now of writing a book on that. Don't ask me the title or what it's about, but I know what it's about, but I just haven't quite articulated it. But those are the people I'm looking for. I'm not looking for people my age and even the next stage down. I'm looking for those young people. Courtney, I talked to probably a dozen of people between 23 and 35, and they're all cradle Catholics, every one of them. Not one of them nor any of their friends go to church.
Wow. Well, I have a whole lifetime of experiencing what marrying outside of your religion does. My mom was a Methodist. All of her whole family still goes to the same Methodist church in Springville, Pennsylvania. And then my dad's family was Roman Catholic. So the messages that I got when I was young, when my mom would talk to me about like life lessons and things to be aware of and kind of rules or guidelines, the guardrails, like don't marry someone outside your religion.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why is because, and I didn't understand as a child, like, why is she so upset about this? But the reason why is because back then, when her and my father married, my dad couldn't even step inside my mother's church because that was a sin. Okay, and they're both, these churches are both,
and he certainly couldn't take Eucharist.
Small town churches, but he couldn't go in there. And his father said, you cannot go in that church. And so I learned that from a very young age. My mom was always kind of preaching to me, like, find somebody who has similar spiritual values. But it was so pervasive, that thought, that it really did impact our family in a very negative way, a number of negative ways, because they were from different churches. Now, you don't see that nowadays as much, that, that adherence, and there's a lot of rules that have changed, even in Catholicism. There's been a lot of rules that have changed about, that faith.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that because of the way some of those rules have fallen by the wayside, shows that those systems need to change, and they're trying to change, but they're changing slowly. And so I do think consciousness and where people are going to be coming at is going to be raising to such an extent that a lot of those systems and those dogmas are going to have to change.
The dogmas have to change. I have articulated as we need to form a new vocabulary. Yes. We have to, our vocabulary is antiquated by thousands of years, and we need a new vocabulary, but that's another subject. Yep. Yeah, Courtney Marchesani.
The reverence is missing. What you're talking about.
Oh, yes. Reverence and awe and beauty and wisdom.
God of your heart, like the New Age pastor said. I really like, who is the God of your heart? What does that look like? What does it mean to you? How do you make contact with it? How do you have reverence and revelatory experiences that enhance that connection and give you faith and deeper purpose?
We could have a month of talks.
Bethany Beach.
You really are. You really are. Just every time I chat with you, and it's been over a year, I think, and it is just such a delight. I love having you on the show. The listeners love having you on the show. You are a very special person, Courtney. And,
thank you, Charlie. And I love your perspective as well. And I like it when we commingle those ideas, because it's like a creative stew that comes up and something new is formed.
Is there any way you want listeners to get a hold of you, or do you want to remain?
Well, I'm on Inspired Potentials. I'm going through a new website change. I will be writing a new book. I am going to be talking about the angels and the new physics, around angels and some of these divine perceptions. So just stay tuned.
Okay, send me information so I can let people know, because I want to read it and I want to send it out to people to listen to it, because you are worthy.
Yes. Well, I've started working on it. So when I get it done, I will send you a note, and then we can talk about the book.
Okay, that'd be great.
Perception.
Thanks,
Charlie.
Thanks, Courtney. Love you. Bye.
All right. Love you too. Bye-bye.